The gunshot echoed through the valley as Olivia Taylor clutched her tattered shawl against the cool evening air. Her crimson lips pressed into a thin line of determination. Lead, South Dakota, 1876, a mining boomtown nestled in the Black Hills where gold fever gripped men's hearts and church bells rang with hypocritical piety. She'd just been thrown out of the only home she'd known for the past 3 years, the gilt-edged saloon, with nothing but the dress on her back and a voice that could make angels weep. "You can't do this to me," she shouted at Reverend Pike, who stood on the steps of the Lead Methodist Church, his face contorted with righteous indignation, surrounded by the town's most respectable citizens. "Miss Taylor, your performances have become a stain on this God-fearing community," the Reverend boomed, his voice carrying across the dusty Main Street. "Your songs of love and loss, sung while men drink and gamble, it's an abomination." "I sing to live, Reverend," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "What would you have me do instead?" "Perhaps honest work befitting a woman," Mrs. Henderson sniffed, her pinched face reflecting the sentiment of the gathered crowd. "Or leave Lead altogether." Olivia felt her world crumbling around her. The saloon owner, Mr. Finch, had buckled under the pressure of the church committee. After weeks of threats to revoke his liquor license and rumors spread about immoral activities, he had finally asked Olivia to leave. The church's campaign against her had succeeded. Even the room she rented above the saloon was no longer hers. "This ain't right," came a deep voice from behind the crowd. The sea of disapproving faces parted, revealing a tall figure astride a chestnut mare. Hank Morgan removed his worn leather hat, revealing sun-bleached hair and eyes the color of the Dakota sky. Dust clung to his denim and leather, telling the tale of a long ride. He was known around these parts as a skilled rancher who kept mostly to himself, trading in town only when necessary. "Mr. Morgan," the Reverend acknowledged with a stiff nod, "this matter doesn't concern you." "Seems to me that running a woman out of her livelihood on a cold evening concerns any decent man," Hank replied, dismounting with fluid grace that belied his tall frame. "Especially when that woman's only crime is having a voice that reminds men there's beauty in this harsh world." Olivia stared at the cowboy, recognizing him as a quiet patron who occasionally sat in the back of the saloon during her performances. He never drank much, never caused trouble, just listened with an intensity that had made her nervous at first. "The church has decided," began the Reverend, but Hank cut him off. "The church ain't God," he said simply. He turned to Olivia, his weathered face softening. "Miss Taylor, I have a cabin on my ranch. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry." "I can't accept charity, Mr. Morgan," she said, though the chill wind made her shiver visibly. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Not offering charity, madam. I'm thinking bigger." He looked directly at the Reverend as he spoke his next words. "If the church casts you out, then I'll build us a new home." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. "A place where folks can gather, hear music, enjoy themselves without judgment," Hank continued. "A place where your talent would be appreciated, not condemned." "You'd build a rival establishment," the Reverend sputtered, his face reddening. That's free enterprise, Reverend," Hank said calmly. "Last I checked, that wasn't a sin, even in your book." Olivia felt a flicker of hope stir within her chest. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Hank replied, extending his hand. "I've got the land, and thanks to some lucky strikes in my claim up north, I've got the means. What I don't have is what you do, the ability to bring light into people's lives." Olivia hesitated, acutely aware of the hostile stares surrounding them. She barely knew this man, yet something in his steady gaze told her she could trust him. In a world where men had often wanted only one thing from her, Hank Morgan's eyes held something different respect. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Morgan?" she asked cautiously. "A business partnership to start," he answered. "My land and resources, your talent. We'll build a place where folks can gather for music and community without the church dictating who's worthy and who ain't." The Reverend stepped forward, Bible clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "You'll both be ostracized from decent society," Hank shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time I've stood apart from what folks around here call decent society. Besides," he added with a wry smile, "I reckon half your congregation already sneaks into the gilt edge to hear Miss Taylor sing when you're not watching." A few uncomfortable shuffles from the crowd confirmed his words, and Olivia couldn't help but smile despite her predicament. "What do you say, Miss Taylor?" Hank asked, still holding out his hand. "My ranch is a half-hour ride from here. You're welcome to stay in the spare room while we figure out the details." Olivia looked around at the town that had been her home, at the faces that now rejected her, and at the hand extended toward her offering not just shelter for the night but a future of her own making. "I accept your offer, Mr. Morgan," she said, placing her hand in his. The warmth of his calloused palm sent an unexpected shiver up her arm. Hank nodded once, then helped her onto his horse. As they rode out of town, Olivia could feel the stares of the townspeople boring into her back. She didn't look back, but she felt the weight of her decision with every hoofbeat. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed quietly as they left the town limits. "I've never been anything but a saloon singer. And I've never been anything but a rancher and sometimes prospector," Hank replied. "Reckon we'll figure it out together." The journey to Hank's ranch took them through rolling hills covered in pine trees, their silhouettes dark against the deepening twilight sky. By the time they arrived, stars were scattered across the heavens like diamond dust. Hank's cabin turned out to be a well-built two-story house with a wide front porch and glass windows, luxuries in this part of the territory. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and in the distance, Olivia could make out grazing cattle. "You live here alone?" she asked as he helped her dismount. "Just me and my foreman, Eduardo. He's got a small cabin by the creek." Hank led her up the porch steps. "He runs things when I'm out prospecting." The interior of the house surprised Olivia with its comfortable furnishings and cleanliness. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, with bookshelves lining one wall, more books than she'd seen outside the town's small library. "You read a lot," she observed, running her fingers along the spines. "Long winters," Hank replied simply. He gestured toward a hallway. "Spare room's first door on the right. There's a washroom at the end of the hall. I'll get a fire going and fix us something to eat." Left alone in the tidy guest room, Olivia sat heavily on the bed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. What had she done? Thrown her lot in with a near stranger, left behind everything familiar. Yet, as she looked around at the clean sheets and sturdy furniture, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: safety. Over a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and fresh bread, Hank explained his vision. "There's a clearing about a quarter-mile from the main house, near the road. Good spot for building. I've been thinking about expanding anyway, maybe a roadhouse where travelers could get a hot meal, ranchers could gather. And I would sing there." Olivia asked, wrapping her hands around a mug of coffee. Hank nodded. "If you wanted to. Could be more than that, though. You could run the place if you've a mind to. I'm not much for socializing." "I noticed," she said with a small smile. "You barely spoke 2 words when you came to the saloon." A faint color rose in his tan cheeks. Was there for the music, not the conversation. The admission touched her. Most men came to the saloon for the whiskey, the gambling, or the girls. Few came just to listen. Why are you doing this, Mr. Morgan? Truly. Hank set down his fork, considering his words carefully. When I first came to these hills, I was running from something, found peace here. Then I heard you sing one night about longing and belonging. Made me think maybe there's more to peace than just being alone. His honesty disarmed her. I don't know how to thank you. No need for thanks. This benefits us both, he said practically. Get some rest, Miss Taylor. Tomorrow we can ride into the clearing and you can see if my idea makes any sense to you. That night, lying in a strange bed in a strange house, Olivia should have felt afraid or at least unsettled. Instead, she felt the first stirrings of something that felt dangerously like hope. The following morning dawned clear and bright. After a breakfast of eggs and more of the surprisingly good bread, which Hank admitted sheepishly that he baked himself, they rode to the clearing he had mentioned. It was perfect level ground with a view of the hills, set back from the road but visible enough to attract travelers. A small creek ran nearby, providing water and a pleasant sound. What do you think? Hank asked as they stood in the center of the space. Olivia turned slowly, imagining what could be. It's wonderful, but building something like this it would take months, wouldn't it? With enough hands, less time than you'd think, Hank said confidently. I've got connections with the lumber mill in Deadwood, and most of the ranchers around here owe me favors. We could have the frame up before the first snow. And in the meantime, she asked. In the meantime, you stay at the main house. I've got a piano in the study that hasn't been played in years. You could practice there if you like. You have a piano? Olivia couldn't hide her surprise. Hank's expression turned slightly wistful. My mother's. Had it brought out from St. Louis years ago. Cost more to transport than the piano itself was worth, but she loved that thing. He led her to a room she hadn't noticed the night before. When he opened the door, she gasped. The study was lined with more bookshelves, but at its center sat a beautiful upright piano, its wood gleaming in the morning light. May I? She whispered, drawn to it like a moth to flame. Hank nodded, staying by the doorway as she approached the instrument with reverence. Her fingers brushed the keys gently before she sat down on the bench and began to play. The piano was perfectly tuned, and its rich tones filled the room with a warmth that brought tears to her eyes. She sang softly at first, then with growing confidence a ballad about a woman finding her way in a harsh land. When she finished, she turned to find Hank watching her with an expression that made her heart flutter strangely. That's why, he said quietly. That's why I'm doing this. Some things are too beautiful to be silenced. Over the next few days, they settled into an unexpected rhythm. During the mornings, Hank would work with his cattle or meet with neighbors about their building plans. Olivia took over the kitchen, discovering a joy in cooking she'd never had the opportunity to explore. In the afternoons, she would practice at the piano while Hank worked on sketches for their new establishment. A week after her arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a newfound ease between them. I think we should call it the Harmony, Olivia suggested suddenly. The Harmony, for our place. Not a saloon exactly, something different, a place where music and community come together. Hank smiled a rare, full smile that transformed his serious face. The Harmony. I like that. Word spread quickly through the scattered homesteads and ranches. The cowboy who lived apart from others was building something new with the saloon singer cast out of lead. Curiosity was a powerful force in isolated communities, and soon neighbors began stopping by ostensibly to offer help with the building but really to catch a glimpse of the famous singer. To Olivia's surprise, they were welcomed warmly. The church's influence, it seemed, was largely confined to the town itself. Out here, where life was harder and pleasures fewer, People were less concerned with appearances and more with genuine connection. Eduardo, Hank's foreman, proved to be a godsend. A skilled carpenter as well as a rancher, he took Hank's rough sketches and transformed them into practical building plans. His wife, Maria, became Olivia's first friend in her new life, teaching her how to make tortillas and sharing stories of her homeland in Mexico. As October turned to November, the frame of the harmony took shape. True to Hank's word, neighboring ranchers came to help, turning the building into a community project. Even a few miners from the outlying claims joined in, drawn by rumors of the Saloon singer who would perform there. Through it all, Olivia and Hank circled each other cautiously. She noticed how he never intruded on her privacy, how he always asked rather than assumed. He noticed how she brought order and beauty to spaces that had been merely functional, how she remembered each helper's name and something personal about them. One evening, as the first snow dusted the ground, Olivia found Hank sitting alone by the fireplace, staring into the flames with an unreadable expression. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, sitting in the chair opposite him. "Was just thinking about my father," he replied, surprising her with his openness. "He was a hard man. Believed work was everything, pleasure was sin. When I told him I was heading west instead of taking over his business in St. Louis, he said I'd never amount to anything." "You've built something wonderful here," Olivia said softly. "Have I?" Hank looked up at her. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just running from his ghost. Aren't we all running from something?" She thought of her own past the orphanage in Chicago, the series of jobs that led her to singing in saloons, the men who had tried to own her voice and more. The question is, what are we running toward? Their eyes met across the firelight, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had found refuge in each other's company. The first real test of their partnership came in early December. The walls and roof of the Harmony were complete, and work had begun on the interior. Olivia had ridden into lead with Eduardo to purchase furnishings and supplies when she encountered Reverend Pike outside the general store. "Miss Taylor," he said coldly, "I see you've not yet seen the error of your ways." Olivia stood straight, refusing to be cowed. "Good afternoon, Reverend. I see you haven't yet discovered the virtue of minding your own business." The Reverend's face darkened. "Your establishment will bring nothing but sin and degradation to our community. I've already spoken with the county commissioners about denying you a business license." Fear gripped Olivia's heart, but she kept her expression neutral. "On what grounds? Moral turpitude," he replied smugly. "The testimony of God-fearing citizens concerned about the influence of your singing on impressionable minds." Eduardo stepped forward, his normally gentle expression hardening. "Sir, you speak of God, but your words are not of God's love." "Stay out of this, Mexican," the Reverend snapped. "That's quite enough," came a firm female voice. Mrs. Henderson, the mayor's wife who had been among those condemning Olivia, approached from the milliner's shop. "Reverend Pike, I'm surprised at you." "Mrs. Henderson, I'm merely protecting our community by harassing a woman doing honest business, by insulting Mr. Rodriguez, who has been nothing but a credit to this territory." She turned to Olivia. "Miss Taylor, I owe you an apology. My husband and I rode out to see this new place you're building. It's not what I expected." Olivia's surprise must have shown on her face. "We saw families helping," Mrs. Henderson continued, "children playing while their parents worked. Mr. Morgan explained your vision for a place where people could enjoy music and company without the rougher elements of a typical saloon." She looked pointedly at the Reverend. "It sounds rather like the community gatherings we used to have back east before you decided they were too frivolous," Reverend. The Reverend sputtered, but Mrs. Henderson wasn't finished. As for the county commissioners, my husband happens to be chairman. I don't believe they'll be denying any licenses based on unfounded rumors. She smiled tightly at Olivia. Good day, Miss Taylor. Mr. Rodriguez. I look forward to attending your opening. As she walked away, leaving the Reverend fuming, Olivia exchanged a look of astonishment with Eduardo. Something had shifted in their favor. When they returned to the ranch and told Hank what had happened, his reaction surprised her. I invited them out last week, he admitted. Figured if they saw what we were actually building, it might change some minds. You didn't tell me, Olivia said, feeling both touched and slightly betrayed that he'd kept this from her. Didn't want to get your hopes up, he replied, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. Besides, you were busy with the piano delivery. The beautiful new piano for the harmony had arrived 3 days earlier, and Olivia had indeed been preoccupied with ensuring it was perfectly placed and protected from the construction. Thank you, she said simply, impulsively reaching out to squeeze his hand. Hank looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. For a moment, it seemed he might say something more, but instead he just nodded and gently withdrew his hand. Best get back to work, he said gruffly. Still got a lot to do before opening day. As December progressed, preparations for the Harmon's grand opening consumed them both. Olivia created menus with Maria's help, combining traditional American fare with Mexican dishes that Eduardo assured them would be popular. Hank designed a unique stage that put the performer at the center of the room rather than tucked away in a corner. Christmas approached, bringing with it a deep sense of purpose Olivia had never experienced before. This would be a new beginning not just for her, but for Hank and the community they were creating around them. 3 days before Christmas, a heavy snow began to fall. By morning, drifts reached the windows of the main house, and the path to the Harmony was completely obscured. They were effectively snowed in. Might be a few days before we can get back to work, Hank said as they stood on the porch, surveying the winter landscape. Will this delay the opening? Olivia asked, trying to hide her disappointment. Probably push it to New Year's instead of Christmas, he admitted. But that might be better anyway, more of a celebration. They spent the day in comfortable confinement, Olivia baking Christmas cookies from Hank's mother's recipe. Hank tending to the fire and catching up on bookkeeping for the ranch. As evening fell, they sat before the fireplace, a plate of cookies between them and mugs of hot cider warming their hands. I've never had a real Christmas before, Olivia confessed. In the orphanage, we got one small gift each, usually something practical like socks. In the saloons, Christmas was just another busy night. My mother tried to make it special, Hank replied. Even after she got sick, she'd insist on decorating everything. After she died, my father pretty much ignored the holiday. He took a sip of cider. Haven't celebrated properly in years myself. Olivia looked around the cozy room, feeling suddenly determined. Then we should change that. We have 3 days until Christmas. Let's make it special. The next morning, they bundled up and ventured into the snowy forest near the house. Hank chopped down a small pine tree while Olivia gathered evergreen boughs and red berries. By afternoon, the main room was transformed with natural decorations and candles. Hank disappeared into the attic and returned with a dusty trunk. My mother's Christmas ornaments, he explained, his voice slightly rough with emotion. Haven't opened this in 15 years. Together, they unwrapped delicate glass balls and hand-carved wooden figures, each one prompting a story about Hank's childhood that he seemed surprised to find himself sharing. Olivia listened eagerly, piecing together the history of this complex man who had offered her a new life. As Hank hung the last ornament, a small angel with golden wings, Olivia began to play Christmas carols on the piano. When she started to sing Silent Night, Hank stopped what he was doing and simply stood listening, his expression one of quiet wonder. "Your voice," he said when she finished. "It's like nothing I've ever heard before." "Thank you," she replied, feeling strangely shy under the intensity of his gaze. "No, I mean it. When you sing, it's like the world stops spinning for a moment." He moved closer, sitting beside her on the piano bench. "You make me remember things I thought I'd forgotten." "What things?" she asked softly. "That there's beauty in this world worth fighting for, worth building for." Their eyes met, and Olivia felt something shift between them, a barrier lowering, a truth acknowledged. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Hank leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over almost before it began. Hank drew back, studying her face anxiously. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have." Olivia silenced him by placing her fingers against his lips. "Don't apologize, not for that." "Olivia," he whispered her name for the first time. "I don't want you to think I expect anything from you because of what I'm doing with the harmony. That's yours, no matter what happens between us." His concern touched her deeply. "I know that, Hank. I've known that from the first day. You've never once made me feel like I owed you anything." "You don't," he insisted. "You never will." "Maybe I want to give something freely," she replied, her heart pounding. "Did you consider that?" His eyes darkened. "What are you saying?" Instead of answering with words, Olivia leaned forward and kissed him, not the hesitant brush of lips he had offered, but a kiss that spoke of longing and newfound trust. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she felt herself melting into his embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hank rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first heard you sing," he admitted, "but I never thought." "Neither did I," she whispered back. "But here we are." Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling white canvas. Olivia woke early, slipping from her bed to prepare a special breakfast. As she worked in the kitchen, she reflected on how drastically her life had changed in just 2 months. From homeless and rejected to what? Partner in a promising new business, yes, but also something more personal that was still taking shape between her and Hank. She heard his footsteps on the stairs and turned to see him enter the kitchen, his hair still tousled from sleep. The sight sent a warm flutter through her chest. "Merry Christmas," he said, his voice rough with sleep but his eyes bright. "Merry Christmas," she replied, suddenly shy despite the kisses they had shared the previous evening. Hank crossed to her and, after a moment's hesitation, placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Something smells good. Cinnamon rolls, my specialty, though I rarely got to make them at the saloon." She gestured toward the table. "Coffee's ready." They ate breakfast together, stealing glances across the table like teenagers, both still adjusting to this new dimension of their relationship. Afterward, Hank insisted they move to the Christmas tree for gifts. "You didn't need to get me anything," Olivia protested. "You've already given me so much." "Humor me," Hank replied with a small smile, reaching beneath the tree for a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. "It's not much, but—" Olivia carefully unwrapped it to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate pattern of musical notes. Inside, the pages were lined for writing, with occasional blank staves for musical notation. "I noticed you sometimes scribble notes when you're working on a new song," Hank explained. "Thought you might like something proper to write in." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes. It was the most thoughtful gift she'd ever received. "It's perfect, thank you." "Open the back cover," he urged. She did, finding an inscription in neat, careful handwriting. To Olivia, whose voice brings harmony to a discordant world. Yours, Hank. Unable to speak past the lump in her throat, Olivia reached for her own gift, a small package she'd hidden in the piano bench. Now yours. Hank unwrapped it carefully to reveal a silver pocket watch. When he opened it, music began to play, a tiny music box mechanism playing the first few notes of Home on the Range. "How did you?" he began, looking at her in wonder. "I traded with Mr. Peterson at the jewelry store in Deadwood when we went for supplies last week. Gave him one of my mother's brooches." She touched the watch gently. "So you'll always have music with you, even when I'm not there." Hank closed his hand around the watch, then reached for her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For the gift, yes, but for everything else too, for bringing life back into this house." They spent the day in peaceful companionship, playing cards, reading aloud from Hank's collection of books, and planning the final details for the harmony. As twilight approached, Hank built up the fire while Olivia prepared a Christmas dinner of roast chicken, potatoes, and apple pie. Over dinner, Hank suddenly looked serious. "There's something I need to tell you, Olivia, something about my past." She set down her fork, giving him her full attention. "I'm listening." "The reason I left St. Louis." He took a deep breath. "My father wasn't just a businessman. He was involved in politics, the kind that involved bribes and threats. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, not just in business but in all of it." "And you refused?" Olivia guessed. Hank nodded. "I discovered he was having his opponents threatened, physically threatened. One man was nearly beaten to death for opposing a development project. When I confronted my father, he said it was just business." His jaw tightened at the memory. "We fought. I told him I wanted no part of his empire if that's how it was built. He disowned me on the spot." "That's why you came west," Olivia said softly. "With nothing but the clothes on my back and my mother's piano," he confirmed. "Made my way out here, worked cattle drives, did some prospecting, got lucky with a few claims, bought this land." He met her eyes directly. "I wanted you to know. Before we go any further with whatever this is between us." Olivia reached across the table to take his hand. "Thank you for trusting me with that. But Hank, we all have pasts we're not proud of, or pasts that shaped us in ways we're still trying to understand. You want to talk about yours?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "My mother was a seamstress in Chicago, never knew my father. She died of influenza when I was 8 and I went to the orphanage." The words came easier than she expected. "When I was 16, I aged out. Worked as a maid, then in a factory. Hated every minute of it." "How did you start singing?" Hank asked. "There was a tavern near the factory. I'd stop in sometimes just to hear the piano player. One night he was sick and they had no entertainment. I offered to sing." She smiled at the memory. "The owner couldn't pay much, but it was more than I made at the factory, and it felt like flying instead of drowning." "And eventually you came west, with a theater troupe initially. When they went bankrupt in Cheyenne, I made my way to Deadwood, then lead." She squeezed his hand. "The rest you know." "Not all of it," Hank said carefully. "There were rumors in town about you and certain patrons at the Saloon." Olivia stiffened, then deliberately relaxed her shoulders. "I sang for my living, Hank, only that. Some men assumed more was available if they paid enough, but Mr. Finch was actually decent about protecting his singers from that kind of pressure." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "I've never sold myself, if that's what you're asking." Relief washed over his face, followed immediately by embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "No, it's a fair question," she interrupted. "There were plenty of girls who did, and I don't judge them for it. Life is hard for a woman alone." She withdrew her hand from his. Does it matter to you? Would it change things if I had? Hank considered the question seriously, and she appreciated that he didn't rush to reassure her with platitudes. I think, he said finally, that we're all doing our best to survive with whatever tools we have. I can't say it wouldn't have mattered at all. I'm not that enlightened, but it wouldn't have changed what I feel when I hear you sing, or what I've come to feel for you these past weeks. His honesty touched her more than any pretty declaration could have. Thank you for that. Thank you for understanding why I had to ask. The air between them cleared, they finished their dinner and moved to the fireplace, where they sat side by side, watching the flames dance. The snow's melting, Hank observed, glancing toward the window. We should be able to get back to work on the harmony tomorrow. I can't wait, Olivia said, excitement bubbling in her voice. New Year's Eve will be perfect for the opening. Are you nervous? He asked, studying her profile in the firelight. A little, she admitted. It's different, performing for people who have helped build the place, who know me as more than just a voice in a saloon. They'll love you, Hank said with certainty. Just like he stopped abruptly. Olivia turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. Just like you what? Hank's eyes, so blue in the firelight, held her steadily. Just like I've come to love you, Olivia Taylor. I know it's fast, and I know you might not feel the same, but she silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her newfound feelings into it. When they finally parted, she smiled up at him. It's not too fast when you know, Hank Morgan, and I know. The days leading up to New Year's Eve passed in a blur of activity. With the weather clearing, work on the harmony resumed at a frantic pace. Word had spread throughout the Black Hills about the grand opening, and Hank estimated they might see guests from as far as Deadwood and even Rapid City. The interior was finally coming together, a large open room with the stage at its center, tables radiating outward, and a long bar along one wall. The piano held pride of place on the stage, with space for other musicians to join in. Olivia had insisted on a small dance floor as well, remembering how people in Lead had often lamented the lack of proper space for dancing. On December 30th, Eduardo brought surprising news from town. The church committee is coming, he announced as they put the finishing touches on the bar. Reverend Pike and at least 6 others. Coming to cause trouble? Hank asked, his expression darkening. Eduardo shook his head. Mrs. Henderson says they're coming to see for themselves what we've built. Some kind of official inspection. Olivia and Hank exchanged worried glances. They had made progress with individual town leaders, but the committee as a whole still represented the force that had driven Olivia out. Well, we have nothing to hide, Olivia said firmly. Let them come. The committee arrived the following afternoon, just hours before the grand opening was scheduled to begin. Reverend Pike led the procession, his face set in disapproving lines. Behind him came Mrs. Henderson, the bank manager, the town doctor, and 3 other prominent citizens. Hank met them at the door, his posture relaxed but his eyes watchful. Afternoon, folks. Welcome to the harmony. Mr. Morgan, the Reverend acknowledged stiffly. We understand you intend to open this establishment tonight. That's right, New Year's Eve celebration. You're all welcome to attend. Before that happens, the Reverend continued, the committee feels it necessary to inspect the premises and ensure it meets the moral standards of our community. Olivia stepped forward from where she had been arranging flowers on the tables. Please, come in. We'd be happy to show you around. The committee members filed in, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. As they entered the main room, several gasped audibly. The harmony was beautiful. Polished wooden floors gleamed in the afternoon light streaming through large windows. The bar, crafted from local pine, had been stained to a rich amber hue. Tables were set with clean cloths and simple wildflower arrangements, and dominating it all was the stage with its magnificent piano. "This is not what we expected," the doctor admitted, looking around in evident admiration. "What did you expect, Dr. Phillips?" Olivia asked. "Well, frankly, something more like the Gilt Edge," he replied. "Dark corners, gambling tables, women of questionable virtue." "The Harmony isn't a saloon in that sense," Hank explained, gesturing for them to follow as he began a tour. "It's a place for music, good food, and community gathering." He showed them the kitchen, where Maria was preparing food for the evening's celebration. He pointed out the absence of private rooms or back entrances that might facilitate illicit activities. He emphasized the family-friendly aspects: early dinners before the evening entertainment, special events planned for community celebrations. Throughout it all, Olivia watched the committee members' faces. Most were softening, their preconceptions challenged by what they were seeing. Only Reverend Pike maintained his rigid disapproval. "And what of alcohol?" the Reverend asked finally. "Will you be serving spirits here?" "Wine and beer," Hank confirmed. "In moderation with meals or during performances, no hard liquor." "And the nature of the entertainment?" the Reverend pressed, looking pointedly at Olivia. She met his gaze steadily. "I'll be singing, Reverend. Songs of life and love, hope and heartbreak, the same songs that have always moved people. Nothing indecent, nothing that would shame me to sing in front of children." "You'll forgive me if I find that hard to believe, given your previous venue," the Reverend said coldly. Mrs. Henderson surprised everyone by coming to Olivia's defense. "Reverend, I've heard Miss Taylor sing, both at the Gilt Edge and recently at a private gathering. Her voice is a gift, and the songs she chooses are uplifting rather than degrading." The bank manager nodded in agreement. "My wife and I intend to attend tonight's opening. From what I see here, the Harmony will be an asset to our community, not a detriment." The Reverend looked around, realizing he was losing his allies. "The committee will need to deliberate. With all due respect, Reverend," the doctor interrupted. "I see nothing here that requires deliberation. Mr. Morgan has created a respectable establishment that fills a need in our community for wholesome entertainment." "I agree," said the blacksmith, speaking for the first time. "My family will be attending tonight as well." The Reverend's face flushed with anger, but he was clearly outnumbered. "Very well," he said stiffly. "The committee will not oppose your opening. However, we reserve the right to revisit the matter if complaints arise." "That's fair," Hank said, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, the Reverend shook it briefly before turning to leave. As the committee filed out, Mrs. Henderson lingered behind. "You've accomplished something remarkable here," she told them both. "Don't mind the Reverend, he'll come around eventually. He's not a bad man, just set in his ways." When they were finally alone, Olivia turned to Hank with shining eyes. "We did it." "We did," he agreed, pulling her into a quick embrace. "But there's still plenty to do before tonight. Better get ready." The grand opening of the Harmony exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. By sunset, wagons and riders were arriving from across the Black Hills. Ranchers and their families, miners from nearby claims, townspeople from Lead and even Deadwood filled the tables and spilled onto the porch, where Eduardo had set up additional seating. Maria's food was a sensation, her enchiladas and tamales providing a taste many had never experienced before. The beer flowed freely but responsibly, and the atmosphere was one of genuine celebration. At 8 o'clock, Hank stood on the stage and raised his hands for silence. "Welcome, friends and neighbors, to the Harmony," he said, his deep voice carrying easily through the crowded room. This place was born from a simple idea that music and community belong together, that beauty deserves a home where it can be shared by all. He gestured toward Olivia, who stood at the edge of the stage in a simple but elegant blue dress. Some of you know Miss Olivia Taylor from her performances elsewhere. Tonight, she sings for the first time in a place built to honor her gift. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the heart and soul of the harmony. As applause filled the room, Olivia took her place at the piano. For a moment, her fingers hovered over the keys as she surveyed the expectant faces before her. So different from the rowdy crowds at the gilt-edge families with children, elderly couples, people who had come specifically to hear her sing rather than as an accompaniment to drinking and gambling. She began with a song about new beginnings, her clear soprano voice filling the room with hope and promise. As she sang, she watched the faces of her audience, saw tears in some eyes, smiles on others, and on Hank's face, a look of such pride and love that it nearly made her voice falter. For 2 hours, she sang ballads and folk songs, a few hymns that had the church committee members nodding in approval, and livelier tunes that set feet tapping. When she finally announced a break, the applause was thunderous. Hank brought her a glass of water as she stepped down from the stage. "You're magnificent," he murmured, his eyes never leaving her face. "It's the room," she replied. "The acoustics are perfect. Did you plan that?" "Had some help from a carpenter who used to build theaters back east," he admitted. "Wanted your voice to carry just right." Before she could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and requests for favorite songs. Olivia was startled to see Reverend Pike among them, standing awkwardly at the edge of the group. "Miss Taylor," he said stiffly when she approached him, "your performance was most uplifting." It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get. "Thank you, Reverend. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I particularly appreciated your rendition of Amazing Grace," he continued. "My late wife used to sing that hymn." Something in his expression, a flash of old grief, helped Olivia understand him better. "Perhaps you'd like to request another hymn for the second half." A hint of a smile touched his stern mouth. "I would appreciate that. How great thou art if you know it." "I do," she assured him. As midnight approached, Hank rejoined her on stage, looking uncharacteristically nervous as he addressed the crowd. "As we prepare to welcome 1877, I'd like to say a few words," he began. "When I came to the Black Hills years ago, I was a solitary man seeking solitude. I found that, and more, I found a place to put down roots, neighbors who became friends." He turned to look at Olivia. "And recently, I found something I'd stopped believing in, a reason to build not just a business or a ranch, but a future." Whispers rippled through the crowd as Hank turned back to face them. "The harmony exists because this community embraced a vision of something new, a place where music and fellowship matter more than old prejudices or rigid thinking." He gestured around the room. "Look at who's here tonight: ranchers and townspeople, miners and merchants, people who might never have broken bread together otherwise. That's the real harmony we're celebrating." Cheers erupted, glasses were raised, and in that moment, Olivia felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. As the clock struck midnight, Hank surprised everyone, Olivia most of all, by dropping to one knee beside the piano. "Olivia Taylor," he said, his voice steady despite the flush rising in his cheeks. "I promised to build you a new home when the church cast you out. But in doing so, I found my own home not in these walls, but in your presence, your voice, your spirit." Gasps and delighted murmurs spread through the crowd as he produced a small box from his pocket. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued, "but when you know, you know. And I know that I want to start this new year, and every year after, with you by my side." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Olivia's vision as she looked from the ring to Hank's face so full of love and hope and vulnerability. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As Hank slipped the ring onto her finger and the room erupted in cheers, Olivia knew that her journey from cast-out saloon singer to respected performer was complete. More importantly, she had found a partner who valued not just her voice, but her strength, her resilience, and her heart. The first months of 1877 passed in a whirlwind of happiness and hard work. The Harmony quickly became the social center of the region, drawing visitors from across the Black Hills. Olivia's reputation grew, bringing music lovers from as far as Cheyenne and even Denver to hear her perform. They were married in April, as the first wildflowers bloomed across the hills. The ceremony took place at the Harmony, transformed for the day with white ribbons and spring blossoms. To everyone's surprise, Reverend Pike agreed to officiate, acknowledging that he had misjudged both Olivia and Hank's intentions. "Love, when it is true and honorable, deserves the blessing of God and community," the Reverend declared as he joined their hands. "And I have seen that what exists between Hank Morgan and Olivia Taylor is indeed true and honorable." Their wedding celebration lasted well into the night, with musicians from across the territory joining Olivia on stage for a concert that people would talk about for years to come. Hank, normally reluctant to be the center of attention, surprised his bride by joining her for a duet, revealing a pleasant baritone that complemented her soprano perfectly. As summer approached, they settled into a rhythm that balanced their business responsibilities with their new life as husband and wife. Olivia performed 3 nights a week at the Harmony, while also developing a program of music lessons for local children. Hank divided his time between the ranch and the increasingly successful business, discovering an unexpected talent for hospitality that complemented his more reserved nature. In late June, as they sat on the porch of their home watching a thunderstorm roll across the hills, Olivia shared news that would change their lives again. "I went to see Dr. Phillips today," she said, her fingers laced with Hank's. He looked at her with immediate concern. "Are you unwell? You've seemed tired lately." "Not unwell," she replied, a smile spreading across her face. "Just creating something new. We're going to have a baby, Hank, in January." The expression that bloomed on his face, wonder and joy and a touch of fear, was one Olivia knew she would remember all her days. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." He pulled her gently into his arms, one hand coming to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "I never thought. After my father, I wasn't sure I should ever." "You'll be nothing like him," Olivia assured him, understanding his unspoken fear. "You're already nothing like him." Hank nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "We'll build our family the way we built the Harmony, with love and music at its center." The news of their expected child spread quickly through the community, bringing a flood of well wishes and practical advice. Maria proved especially helpful, sharing Mexican traditions and remedies for morning sickness that Olivia found surprisingly effective. As summer turned to fall, Olivia's condition became more visible, and she adjusted her performances accordingly, sitting more often at the piano rather than standing to sing, incorporating more instrumental pieces into her repertoire. The Harmony's patrons, far from being disappointed by these changes, embraced them enthusiastically, offering suggestions for lullabies she might practice for the baby. October brought an unexpected visitor to their door, a dignified older man whose bearing and features immediately reminded Olivia of Hank. "Father," Hank said stiffly when he answered the door, "This is a surprise." Harrison Morgan, SR, removed his hat, revealing silver hair and the same blue eyes as his son. "Hank, may I come in? I've traveled a long way." Olivia watched the complex emotions play across her husband's face: anger, confusion, and beneath it all, a flicker of the child who had once sought his father's approval. "Olivia," Hank said, turning to her, "this is my father, Harrison Morgan, SR. Father, this is my wife, Olivia." The elder Morgan's eyes widened slightly as he took in Olivia's advanced pregnancy, but his manners were impeccable. "Mrs. Morgan, a pleasure to meet you. I apologize for arriving unannounced." "Please come in, Mr. Morgan," Olivia said, stepping forward to take his hat and coat. "You must be tired after your journey. We were just about to have tea." Over tea in the study, the elder Morgan explained his presence. "I had a heart episode last month," he said, his voice matter of fact. "The doctors say I may not have much time left. It made me think about unfinished business." Hank's expression remained guarded. "So this is a deathbed reconciliation," his father sighed. "I deserve that, but no, not exactly. I'm not dying tomorrow, just aware of my mortality in a way I wasn't before." He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the piano. "You've built something impressive here, son. Word of your establishment has reached even St. Louis." "The harmony is primarily Olivia's creation," Hank replied. "Her vision, her talent. But built with your hands and resources," Olivia added, unwilling to let him diminish his contribution. The elder Morgan studied them both. "You complement each other, that's rare." An awkward silence fell, broken when Olivia excused herself to check on dinner preparations, giving father and son privacy to speak more freely. When she returned half an hour later, she found them still in the study, their postures less rigid, though tension remained evident in the set of Hank's shoulders. "I've invited father to stay for a few days," Hank told her, "if that's agreeable to you." "Of course," she replied, reading in his eyes that while no miraculous reconciliation had occurred, some tentative bridge was being constructed between them. Harrison Morgan, SR, proved to be an unexpected ally in the weeks that followed. His business acumen, honed over decades, helped them identify opportunities to expand the Harmony's offerings and streamline its operations. More surprisingly, he developed a genuine appreciation for Olivia's musical talent, attending her performances with evident enjoyment. "You have a gift, my dear," he told her after one particularly moving recital. "One that transcends mere entertainment. It's a rare thing." "Thank you," Olivia replied, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "Music has been my sanctuary when little else was." The elder Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that better now. My late wife Hank's mother felt the same way about her piano. I never fully appreciated what it meant to her until I heard you play." By the time he departed in late November, promising to return for the birth of his grandchild, a fragile peace had been established between father and son. Not forgiveness exactly, but a willingness to build something new from the ashes of their past relationship. "He's trying," Olivia observed as they watched his train pull away from the lead station. "Yes," Hank agreed, his expression thoughtful. "I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive everything, but I'm glad our child will know his grandfather." As winter settled over the Black Hills and the new year approached, Olivia found herself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past 12 months. From homeless outcast to beloved performer, from solitary singer to wife, and soon-to-be mother, the transformation seemed almost too much to comprehend. On a snowy evening in mid-January, as she sat by the fire working on a blanket for the baby, the first pains began. Hank, reading nearby, noticed her sudden stillness. "Is it time?" he asked, instantly alert, Olivia nodded, both frightened and excited. I think so. The next 12 hours tested her strength and Hank's composure. Dr. Phillips was summoned, along with Maria, whose practical experience with childbirth proved invaluable. Through it all, Hank remained by Olivia's side, his steady presence anchoring her through waves of pain. Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that left no doubt about his healthy lungs. He'll be a singer like his mother, Dr. Phillips chuckled as he placed the swaddled infant in Olivia's arms. Henry Eduardo Morgan, she whispered, looking down at the tiny face. They had chosen to honor both Hank and the foreman who had become such an important part of their lives. Hank sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, his expression one of awe as he gazed at their child. "He's perfect," he murmured. "You're both perfect." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of family and home, Olivia knew that the church's rejection had been the greatest blessing of her life. It had led her to Hank, to the harmony, to this new life filled with love and possibility. Spring came early that year, bringing with it Henry's first smiles and the Harmony's first anniversary celebration. The business had flourished beyond their expectations, becoming not just a performance venue but a genuine community center. Weekly music lessons for local children, monthly dances for families, special concerts featuring traveling musicians, all had become part of the Harmony's expanding offerings. On a warm afternoon in late April, Hank and Olivia walked together along the creek that ran through their property, Henry sleeping peacefully in his father's arms. "I've been thinking," Hank said as they paused to watch the water flow over smooth stones, "about expanding the Harmony." "In what way?" Olivia asked, curious. They had already added a small wing for private dining and special events. "Not physically," Hank clarified. "I mean taking the concept elsewhere. There are other communities that could benefit from what we've created, places where music and gathering spaces bring people together." Olivia considered the idea. "You mean building another Harmony in a different town? Eventually, perhaps. But I was thinking we could start by organizing traveling shows. You and a few musicians could perform in towns across the territory. Test the waters, so to speak." The thought of bringing music to isolated communities appealed deeply to Olivia. She remembered her own childhood in the orphanage, how rare and precious musical performances had been. "I like it," she said, smiling up at him. "Though I'd want to wait until Henry is a bit older before traveling extensively." "Of course," Hank agreed, looking down at their sleeping son. "He's part of this vision, too. I want him to grow up understanding the power of music to bridge differences and create community." As they walked back toward the house, Olivia felt a surge of gratitude for this life they were building together, a life that had seemed impossible when she stood outside the church in Lead, rejected and alone. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly. "For what?" Hank asked, puzzled. "For standing up that day, for offering to build a new home when the old one rejected me." Hank stopped walking, turning to face her with Henry still cradled against his chest. "Olivia, you don't need to thank me. What I did was selfish, really. I heard you sing, and I couldn't bear the thought of never hearing that voice again." She shook her head, smiling. "Not selfish. Brave. You risked your reputation, your standing in the community, for a saloon singer you barely knew." "Best risk I ever took," he replied, leaning down to kiss her gently. That evening, as Olivia sang Henry to sleep with a lullaby her own mother had once sung to her, she reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led her here. The church had cast her out, but in doing so, had set her free to find a truer home, one built on acceptance, respect, and love. In the years that followed, the Harmony would indeed expand beyond Lead, spawning similar venues throughout the Black Hills and eventually across the Western Territories. Olivia's voice would become legendary, drawing music lovers from across the nation to hear her perform. Their family would grow too. Henry would be joined by a sister, Melody, and later by twin boys, William and James. All four children would inherit their parents' love of music and community, carrying the Harmony's legacy into the next century. But on that quiet evening in 1877, all of that lay in the future. For now, there was just a woman with a voice that could touch hearts, a man who had recognized its value, and the home they had built together, a harmony of purpose and love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives.